Hi, I'm Bill Shannon, President of the Chatham Railroad Museum Association, and standing in the Chatham Railroad Museum here in Chatham, Illinois. The association has created this museum and we operate it, and we currently are open Saturdays from 1 to 3 every week during the summer months, so welcome visitors. Of course, we ask that you wear a mask, and we have hand sanitizer available and so forth as long as the pandemic is going on, so to speak. But anyway, a quick sort of a tour of the office. This is the business room of the station, so to speak, where the agent conducted all the business for the railroad, sold tickets to passengers, etc. Of course, selling things had to have a place to put it, so have a small safe here that they could store money and other valuable items in. Hopefully nobody break in and try to get into it. And one interesting thing, I think, which is not in use anymore because of radio and instant communications, is the telegraph, which is commonly used for many, many years. And we have the original, what's called sounder for the telegraph, original to this building, which they can send messages. I'm not a telegrapher, so I don't comprehend all the sounds, but somebody experienced would know that. And behind the sounder is an original sign that was on the outside of the building, that advertising the telegraph service here. And this kind of the hub of the business of the building right here, a telephone which they can pull out and move around, is on a pivot to talk to people and conduct business with. And of course, typewriter, had to have a typewriter to type out different messages, orders, etc. Back then there was a lot of rubber stamps used to stamp billing and shipments and what have you. We got a little carousel here with a bunch of rubber stamps and another phone which came into use later. On the wall here is the original phone to this building, the old crank type wall telephone where you would pick up the earpiece, turn the crank, and that would ring the operator, and then you tell the operator what number you wanted to call. And this kind of interesting item. Beside it, I think, is interesting, a photograph of Abraham Lincoln. And in the corner down here is a copy of his pass to the Illinois Central Railroad. And people say, Lincoln? What's that got to do with railroads? Well, before he was president, he was the attorney for the Illinois Central Railroad. So we think that's, relative to here. Another, among many interesting things, is the window. There's one on each side of the room. This looks into the ladies' waiting room. The window on the other side looks into the men's waiting room. And I say ladies and men's because when the building was built in 1902, they actually separated them in waiting rooms. Maybe you've heard it before, but one of the stories I heard is because back then men chewed tobacco, smoked cigars, told dirty jokes, etc., didn't bathe very often, so they kind of put them in one room and the kids and women in another room. Anyway, this window would slide up so the agent in here could sell tickets, talk to people, etc., and shut the window for peace and quiet, I guess. An interesting feature. Unusual item here, this is a copying press, a little ad for one down there. They used back in the days prior to Xerox machines to make copies of something, which I found rather unique because if you stop and think about it, before Xerox, really, how'd you copy an original document? Carbon paper wouldn't work, so they used these things. And beside it, you had to have some heat in the winter, so they had heating stoves. This is not actually a heating stove for this room. It's really for a caboose on the railroad, but just representative of what may have been here, hooked up to the chimney to go outside. As you've probably noticed, and as the camera is swung around, a lot of photographs, etc., on the wall, which I think adds interest to the room. And a door into the men's room. In the corner over here is a file cabinet, would have been used back then, a wooden file cabinet. And swinging around the room some more, trying to not outwalk the camera. Another file cabinet, this one's rather, I think, interesting, and the drawers are flat and you pull out and the front drop down and just reach in and pull out what you want and then swing it back up and shut it. That, to me, was kind of fascinating. Dates back to, we're not sure, probably the 1920s, maybe 30s, somewhere around there. And also it's modular. There's 4 separate units that stack together with wooden pins to hold them together. So I guess you could go, as high as you could reach with them if you need to go that high. And a lantern, kerosene lantern, which would have been used, of course, back in the old day. It's a common way of lighting, but we have modern electricity here, so we don't utilize that. And moving on around, here's the other window I was talking about earlier, a kerosene lantern for lighting as needed. Interesting little item here, it's a ticket stamper. When you bought your tickets, they were basically blank generic tickets, and they would come over to this with your ticket, hit that, and it would stamp it with the name of the station and the date, so that validated your ticket. And it was only good for, that date. So I think it's interesting. Another telephone from way back when. Now here is an item that was in common use. It's a message hoop. Back before radios were in common use and all that on the railroads, if a train was coming and the agent was told the train, say, to reduce speed before reaching Auburn, for example, they'd write the order on a piece of paper, put it on a string on this fork, and then they'd step outside, hold this up in the air. As train went by, the engineer would reach his arm out and catch it, and the strings would pop off, and then they'd unfold the paper and read what their orders may be. That was a fairly common way of communicating back in the old days. Another thing that's kind of interesting, and here, these aren't from this building, but they're for the Illinois Terminal Railroad, which used to go through Chatham, basically right across the street from where we are now. They're insulators. The Illinois Terminal originally was electrified with overhead wires, and these supported the wires on the poles so there were no electrical shorts or anything. And of course, the sign here that says 3-track would have been on a crossing signal in the street, telling you how many tracks there were to cross. A safety issue is so when the lights came on, and then when they went off, you know to look both ways so you don't cross and get hit by another train. And one final thing I think of interest here is this sign hanging from the ceiling. This station was built by the Alton Railroad, and the last use was the GM&O Railroad, and that says Wabash Railroad tickets. Well, Wabash never came closer than to here than in Springfield, but if you wanted to travel, just, say somewhere in Indiana, you'd come here, buy a ticket on this railroad, and go to Springfield, go to the Wabash Station, and use the ticket bought here to head to your destination, because railroads interconnected with each other to get from one part of the country to another, just like airlines do today. So I hope you come to the depot one of these days and enjoy your visit here.